What did you do to Stoni Blair that makes you guilty of premeditated murder?
I intentionally killed her. I punched her. I have put a bag over her head till she lost consciousness. I threw hot water on her, scalding hot water from the faucet. And I don't care what anybody thinks. She had to go, period.
This is 35-year-old Mitchelle Blair. From the hatred and cruelty in her voice, you'd think she was talking about a monster. In reality, the person that she has absolutely no remorse about killing is her daughter, 13-year-old Stoni Blair. Not only did she murder an innocent child who trusted and relied on her, but she tortured her for years on end. And tragically, Stoni wasn't the only victim of this mother of four.
Everybody want to know, yes, I did kill her!
After all is said and done, you imposed the death penalty on your own children.
I did.
Where in your house are they? Freezer. Who put them in there?
I did.
Why did you take the decision to pile the bodies on top of each other in a freezer?
What do you mean?
Why did you do that?
Well, I only had one deep freezer. Take the decision to pile the bodies on top of each other.
Teenager Gabby Blair had no idea that nice mothers existed. For most of her childhood, she believed that all parents put on a facade. In public, they'd be polite, charming, funny. In the comfort of their own home, they'd be angry, critical, and violent. She had never seen any other kind of parenting. Every time she saw her mother interact with friends, family, or the public, she was polite, accommodating, and kind. Her Facebook was peppered with photos and posts declaring how much she loved her kids. To the outside world, she was a loving, single mother of 4 young children. But behind closed doors, she was a ticking time bomb, ready to explode at any moment. Love wasn't something she seemed to know how to show. The only affection she ever showed her kids was an occasional kiss on the forehead before bed. There were no hugs, no congratulations, no praise, no comfort. The only time Gabby remembers her mom cheering for her kids was when she hit 13-year-old Stony in the head with a 2x4 and exclaimed, "Woo, look at that!" at the gushing from the open wound the impact gave her. To the outside world, Mitchelle Blair was a mother. Inside her home, she was a warden. And to this day, she shows absolutely no regret for that.
You meant to kill her.
I definitely meant to kill her. And I do not feel any remorse for what I did to Stony.
What we know about Mitchelle Blair's childhood is minuscule. She grew up in the Detroit area, where it seems she didn't have it easy. In the 10th grade, she left school altogether and engaged in a life completely lacking in stability. She bounced from job to job, bartending, waitressing, and often just staying home. Her aunt, Angela Jordan, repeatedly urged her to get her GED, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. By the time Mitchelle was 19, she had her first daughter, Gabby, with her boyfriend, Alexander Dorsey. 2 years later, their daughter, Stony, followed. Gabby's early memories aren't particularly ones of violence or suffering, but fighting. According to her, her mother would get into fervent arguments with her father in front of her and seemed to constantly be trying to force him out of the house. When her father finally left, Mitchelle refused to let him see his daughters. Mitchelle, however, remembers things differently.
I did it, but that does not negate the fact that they were never there for their children. I had to struggle with them all the time. They were never there.
A few years after the separation in 2004, Mitchelle gave birth to Stephen Gage Berry. 3 years later, she had another son, who I'll be referring to as Mikey to protect his identity. Their father also wasn't around, spending years in and out of prison. Mitchelle struggled financing 4 children with no job. She allegedly leaned on her great aunt for support, requesting money from her when she ran out. When her aunt pushed her to get a job, she'd withdraw, oftentimes disappearing and breaking contact with the family for months on end. This disappearing act is part of what allowed the secrets and violence inside her house to fester. For years, her 3 eldest children attended school at Ralph Bunche Preparatory Academy. By all accounts, they were average kids. Gabby was shy and kind. Stony was known to be outgoing, friendly, warm, and able to talk to anyone and make friends easily. Gabby was the oldest, but in a lot of ways, she looked up to and admired Stony. The kids had no visible signs of abuse at school. Often, Gabby and Stony would ask to eat the leftovers of their classmates, but no one batted an eye. If they had known why they wanted that food, well, things may have been very different. At home, Mitchelle was allegedly spending all of her money on drugs and alcohol. Many days, the kids would be served canned potatoes for breakfast and dinner. Lunch at school was oftentimes the only real meal they would get. And if they complained, asking for more, they were sealing their fate. If Mitchelle heard the kids complain or felt disrespected in any way, she would take the metal end of her belt to their backs. She was careful not to leave marks on their legs or arms, reserving the welts, bruises, and cuts for a place that would always be securely hidden beneath their shirts. Mitchelle was a lot of things, but she wasn't stupid. She was well aware that CPS could and would take her kids for the treatment they were getting. She didn't want to stop her kids. She just didn't want to get caught. Sometime around 2010, Mitchelle abruptly took her kids out of school. This type of sudden isolation is hauntingly typical in cases of child abuse. She told anyone who asked that she was homeschooling, and soon the public's memory of the children fell to the wayside. Inside, things were getting worse. Mitchelle's anger and violence steadily grew out of control. Her weapons of choice changed often, from scalding water to the belt to hot curling irons. At one point, Gabby recalls her mother hitting her in the face with said curling iron. Her mouth filled with blood, and she felt a sensation she can only remember as a crumble. When she looked in the mirror, she realized that her mother had chipped her front tooth. Immediately, her mom went into damage control mode. This wasn't a bruise on her back that was going to disappear before anyone saw. This was permanent, and she needed a cover story. Within minutes of knocking out part of her daughter's tooth, Mitchelle taught Gabby what she was to recite if anyone asked. Her brother hit her in the face with a toy car. Of course, Gabby didn't say no to this. When a relative came over for a rare visit hours later, Gabby told the fake story of what happened to her tooth. Tragically, no one suspected a thing. By then, all the kids had been trained to do exactly as their mother said. Gabby recalls incidents where she and her siblings were forced to stand in scalding hot water in the shower for minor transgressions. Oftentimes, they were forced in just because their mother was in a mood. On one occasion, one of the boys was with an iron. Mitchelle then poured rubbing alcohol over the burn, only adding to the already excruciating pain. This was daily life for Mitchelle Blair's children for at least 2 years. And then, things took an even more sinister turn. In August of 2012, 5-year-old Mikey was playing with 2 toy wrestling figures. He rubbed the dolls together in a fashion that his mother believed was sexual. In that instant, everything changed. The idea that Mikey had been inappropriately touched became an obsession of Mitchelle's. It's not uncommon for children who have been exploited to show signs through play. However, there is no corroborating evidence to support the theory that Mikey was sexually exploited. Immediately, Mitchelle demanded to know who had touched Mikey that way. According to Stony, who was watching helplessly nearby, she demanded an answer for several minutes, becoming increasingly irate until Mikey finally cracked and said, "Stephen." Stephen was just 9, and suddenly he was faced with the wrath of an adult woman convinced of her own delusion. For the next 2 weeks, Stephen was kept in his mother's room, completely isolated from his siblings. If any of them tried to go in to check on him, they were beaten and screamed at. Stephen was repeatedly beaten in unimaginable ways. He was hit with a 2x4 so many times that his head became severely misshapen. He was forced to drink window cleaner, deprived of food, and suffocated repeatedly by plastic bags being held over his head by his mother. At one point, when he managed to break through the bag to gasp for air, she immediately grabbed a stronger bag and suffocated him until he fell unconscious. Then, not done with her torture, she slapped him awake. The violence unleashed on that little boy is beyond words, and tragically, it lasted until the very end. Gabby recalls being called into her mother's room sometime around August 30th, 2012. There, she discovered her mother holding Stephen in her arms. He was weak. Blood and vomit were on his lips. Mitchelle told all of the siblings to say goodbye to Stephen. Gabby kissed her brother on the forehead for the very last time. Mitchelle allegedly sobbed and told Stephen she loved him. Stephen's final words were, "I love you too." Then, after telling the woman who had killed him that he loved her, Stephen took a shaky breath and died in her arms. Moments later, Mitchelle ordered her daughter Gabby to stand up and help her with the body. Gabby was just 14. She had no choice but to help her mother carry the body downstairs, where a chest freezer sat in the middle of their living room. Gabby knew that if she refused, she would be the next person to go in the freezer. With seemingly no remorse, Mitchelle dropped her son into the freezer and closed it shut. He would remain there for the next 3 years. Though he wasn't alone. Mitchelle's paranoia about her children suffering from sexual exploitation didn't disappear with the death of her son. It was simply transferred to her 13-year-old daughter, Stony. Mitchelle became convinced that Stony had harmed her 5-year-old brother. To get confirmation of her delusion, she threatened to hurt Mikey until he told her the truth about Stony touching him. Of course, the 5-year-old conceded, saying Stony had harmed him. With Mitchelle's accusations of her children and her intricate stories of their actions, she did what she sought out to do. She took the blame away from herself and placed it on them. The story she spun grew more and more outlandish with every passing day.
She would tell me different things because she was doing this to him for years, and I did not know that. You get what I'm saying? And I didn't find out till 9 months later. She had started with Stephen. She ruined my son, okay? She started with Stephen before he even started. So, yes, I put a bag over her head, but it got worse that day. Yes, I did. It got worse that day because she would tell me how she would take her pad, her menstrual pad, and squeeze her blood out in his mouth, okay? And it was over with after that. It was over with.
Her daughter was just 13. Again, there is absolutely no evidence that her daughter did any of the horrible things her mother is accusing her of. But if she had, this kind of behavior wouldn't just come from nowhere. It would have to have had been learned from someone. Regardless, Mitchelle became completely enraptured with the delusion that her daughter was evil, corrupting, and torturing Mikey. And the violence that Stony faced escalated beyond belief.
Did you hit her in the head with a wooden stick?
Yes, I hit her on her head multiple times, over and over.
Was that shortly before she died?
That was actually days before she died and the day she died.
Okay.
I hit her on her back. It's like with her tailbone. I kicked her.
For weeks and weeks, Stony was imprisoned here by a life of nothing but sheer pain and torture at the hands of the very woman who was supposed to protect her. At one point, very shortly before Stony's death, Mitchelle hit her in the head with a 2x4 and cheered as blood gushed from her head. This time, when Mitchelle demanded that Gabby help her hide the body, Stony was still breathing. The terrified, wounded child was put inside the freezer on top of the body of her brother, completely aware of what was happening to her. For the next 2 years, Gabby was convinced that she was next. And in March of 2015, she was certain of it. After failing to pay rent for several months, Mitchelle received an eviction notice in the mail. She began to panic, not just about losing their home, but about the realization that she had nowhere to hide the horrific crimes she had committed. On multiple occasions, she had threatened Gabby, telling her that if she told anyone what had happened, she'd kill her brother, then Gabby, and finally herself. After so many months of these threats, Gabby was sure her mother was going to do it. But to her shock, her mother told her to gather her things. Hastily, she asked a neighbor to watch her 2 remaining children, and as the kids watched on, she told her neighbor everything. The court officers performing the eviction looked inside the freezer, and what they discovered would horrify them for the rest of their lives. Initial reports stated that the officers believed the bodies were that of a young boy and an old woman. Stony's body was so fragile and worn at the time of her death that it wasn't even thought possible that she was a young girl. Mitchelle was arrested next door without incident, seemingly accepting her fate. Gabby and Mikey were taken into the custody of their great aunt, who quickly put the 2 into therapy and got them the care they so desperately needed. After committing such horrific crimes for the whole world to see, you would think that Mitchelle would be apologetic. Tragically, she wasn't, in the least. She used her extensive court appearances to further drag her children's names through the mud, specifically Stony's.
That there is no evidence in this case that any of the younger children or the younger child was sexually abused. Abundant evidence that the surviving children were physically abused by this defendant.
That's a lie. My son's own mouth.
Hold on. No, Miss Blair. You noticed the speaker that we had set up in the back. If you can't behave yourself, you're going to get... Okay, listen. You're going to get an opportunity to speak. If you can't behave yourself, I'm going to put you in the back. We'll finish our portion of the proceeding. I can bring you back out here to speak, because you're going to get an opportunity. But if you interrupt people, I have to put you in the back. So it's just this one. Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Goldfarb.
That's the evidence, Your Honor. No physical evidence that that younger child was physically abused. No eyewitness to physical abuse, or sexual abuse in that child, but abundant evidence that he was physically abused, as was his surviving sister, by this defendant.
Ms. Blair, if she ever actually saw or witnessed any of these acts with regard to Stony or...
Okay. Yeah. Did you ever actually see anything of any sexual abuse of any kind between either Stephen and Stony?
I reject her question, but I will answer it because no one will say that this did not happen, because it actually did.
I just want to have a clear record. Because so far all you've told me was that you just heard it. Did you ever
And that they admitted it. No, I did not. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand.
But as I went back in my head and thought back to all the many things that was wrong with you over the years, and I'm like, that's what was wrong with you? He'll use the bathroom and say, Mom, my butt hurts when I poop. I don't know. So I started giving him 100% juice to make his stool softer, maybe to help him use the bathroom. That wasn't the problem. It wasn't his stool. It was that he was being raped, okay?
When asked for the details of her crimes, she didn't spare a single one.
I assaulted her every time he told me what she did to him. By assault, I mean I punched her. I have put a bag over her head till she lost consciousness. I threw hot water on her, scalding hot water from the faucet.
So, man, I don't regret none of this. I don't regret any of it. With my son, that's my baby. There's no way that his brother and sister should know what he feels like inside. There's no way.
Understood.
I don't feel no remorse for the death of them demons.
Okay.
Fortunately, at her sentencing, the judge didn't hide her disdain.
It's my turn to talk. I gave you an opportunity to speak. As a mother, one of your primary responsibilities was to protect your kids. And in that respect, you failed in the worst possible way. There's nothing that can be done at this point to change what happened.
True, that's why I'm asking for life.
I know. And thankfully, that house of horrors that you created is no longer in existence. I do pray that your remaining children...
They will.
...will recover.
They will.
From what they saw and endured in that household. What struck me as rather unnerving was that you stated that your kids got it better than what you had. I fail to see how that's possible when you're still here.
You're talking about the deceased children?
No. Let me talk. Despite what happened to you when you were a child, you had the opportunity to grow up.
True.
You had the opportunity to become an adult. You had the opportunity to make your own decisions with respect to running your own life. And you were blessed with 4 children. Stony and Stephen are never going to have that. They don't have those same opportunities. And when I think about all of the possible joys that they could be missing out on, one thing that strikes me as the greatest tragedy here is that they will never know what a life is like without experiencing fearing their mother. They will never know the joy of what could have been in their life without having you in it. They lived in terrible fear of you. And I find that just so sad in this case. After all is said and done, you imposed the death penalty on your own children.
I did.
For the murder and torture of her children, Mitchelle Blair was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Since landing behind bars, she has only escalated her charges. She's received over 30 counts of misconduct, and in 2017 was charged with assaulting an officer for spitting on, throwing urine at, and throwing food at a guard on multiple occasions. Her daughter Gabby has gone on to graduate from high school and has been outspoken about her mother's crimes. Fortunately, she seems to have a good head on her shoulders and a bright future ahead of her.